Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails Common Ground, where every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we'll meet here for conversations with social justice practitioners and changemakers on how we can mobilize our daily action to radically reimagine our democracy. We'll be going up until the election in November, so stay tuned. We are so excited today to partner with our friends on the other coast, Metabolic Studio, for a second conversation this year on ecological resilience, food sovereignty, stewardship, soil building, and seed saving as crucial acts of resistance. A few quick notes before we get started. We'll be recording this gathering for the Rail and Metabolic Studio archives. So if you would prefer not to be seen, you can disable your camera by pressing the stop video button in the bottom left corner of your screen. We're also going to keep everybody on mute until question time, which I'll kick off about halfway through the event. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat and I will call on you to speak during the Q&A. Alternatively, I'm also happy to read your questions on your behalf. Feel free to introduce yourself and shout out where you're from in the chat. The Rail team will also be helping out with tech if you have any questions. We should have Brooklyn Rail in our names, and closed captions are available if you'd like them. Press the button on the top left corner of your screen that reads custom live streaming. It'll come there. Yeah, welcome everyone. This conversation marks 6 months since we last convened with Lauren Bond, Milli Macen-Moore, and Dr. Vandana Shiva as part of Metabolic's Interdependence Salon. And today we have the additional privilege to be joined by ecological systems designer, Nance Klehm, tuning in, and the poet Zora Said, who will read for us to close. And while these days it feels impossible and extraordinary to remember everything that has happened in the space of these months, when every week it seems that there is a new catastrophe happening, we want to offer this conversation as a space of reflection to check in with one another and share all that we have been doing in the past 6 months' time between now and then. When we last spoke in May, Dr. Shiva told us to get planting as an act of resistance. And when we spoke earlier this week, Lauren, you mentioned that in the 6-month space since then, from full moon to full moon, your studio has gone from seed planting to harvesting from a network of gardens across the country, the bounty of which we see before Milli today. So we look forward to hearing everyone's updates and projects. It's also quite auspicious as well that we're meeting here today to talk about sovereignty and seed and new systems of living on the International Day of Nonviolence, which honors the birthday of anti-colonial leader Mahatma Gandhi, whose ideas of self-rule, liberation, and nonviolent political resistance, from the salt marches to the spinning of hand-spun khadi, have been so formative to our honored guest, Dr. Vandana Shiva. Gandhi famously said that the spinning wheel works as a tool of liberation, precisely because it is so small. And it does not take much to see that this is the root from which perhaps Dr. Shiva's seed freedom might grow as well. At the same time, we want to honor and hold space for the complexities of Gandhi's life and legacy, both personal and political, within the fight for liberation, and take this moment to reflect on the importance for all of us to resist the urge to deify our leaders, symbolic and political, and remember that people are only as important as the movements they are a part of and which they inspire. We would like to now play a short video titled "The Seeds of Vandana Shiva" for you all. So give me just a moment. And here we go.
Food is a weapon. They said when you sell real weapons and arms, you control armies. When you control food, you control society. When you control seed, you control life on Earth. It just so happens that throughout history, in every culture, it's women who kept the seed. I'm born in the Himalayan forest, and non-separation from nature was quite clearly a lesson. We had a classroom out in those forests. I chose as a young child to do physics, even though the schools I went to didn't offer it, because for me, physics was about understanding how the world works. So at the end of it, I did a PhD in foundations, quantum theory, and it's quantum theory that taught me how to make connections. Because of my book, I got invited to a biotech meeting where I realized what the industry wanted to do with the seed, which is to take control of the seed through packaging. That's when I started. I took a commitment to start saving seeds, but I also realized it's not enough to talk anymore. Got to do it. 40% of the solution to climate change lies in organic, ecological farming in the hands of small farmers. Can't wait for governments and corporations to make the shift. People must. A GMO forced on people without a label is a criminal act.
Monsanto is proud to be the industry leader in agricultural innovation.
Monsanto sneaked into the budget law a clause that no court could ever rule against them.
We're committed to helping farmers double yields by 2030.
GMOs haven't produced more. There's only one way: ecological farms, small farms. And yet, we get the propaganda: without GMOs, people will starve. Without chemicals, people will starve. We have enough innovation and technologies to grow more food without killing our farmers. You have to throw the light of disclosure in order to break these secret bonds between manipulated officials, manipulated GMOs, and manipulated science. This is Gandhi. 7 social sins. Politics without principles, wealth without word, pleasure without conscience, worship without sacrifice. If I hadn't felt the imperative to come back to India, both to answer the puzzle of the disconnect between big science and big poverty, as well as just the surge to give back. I didn't know how I'd give back, but I had to give back. Little old lady from India. Why did she drive you nuts?
Deep breath, everybody. I'm going to take a deep breath of this incredible sage, which grounds me. See if you can smell it. See if you can reach that point in your olfactory memory, deep in your DNA, where you still know the smell of healing plants around you. It's such a great privilege to still be here, 6 months after our last talk. We suffer through immense precarity at this moment. And the privilege of being alive is not lost on any of us here today. So birthdays are really important times for gathering. And Vandana, every year on Gandhi's birthday, brings her seed sisters together to celebrate life at her spirit's home. And in that coming together, she challenges us to all go back to where we live, to grow gardens of defiance, gardens of love, garlands of love, as acts of resilience and resistance. So today we're going to take a journey through this thinking on Gandhi's birthday, on the UN day that was established on his birthday for nonviolence and non-participation in all the institutions that keep us oppressed. We claim our freedom today. And we claim our freedom today for our ancestors who started that walk for us a long time ago, acknowledging that they, like us, are human beings destined to have shortcomings and failures, but we call on them today to help us move forward again in this time of immense precarity. In the last 6 months since we were all together, we've really tried to look at Satyagraha as an actionable step. And my colleague Milli Macen-Moore's desk in front of you shows the bounty, just a small amount of the bounty that we've planted in Southern California. And she'll tell us a little bit about that bounty today. Our other colleague in the Midwest by the Great Lakes, Nance Klehm, is here today to talk about the work she's been doing in the last 6 months as a grower, as a first responder, as a networker of other independent growers, and also as a radical ecologist, helping people in often very difficult to grow places, like the polluted hilltops of the Ecuadorian Amazon, figure out how to detoxify their soil and repurpose it so that seed may once again take root and grow and support their indigenous communities. And of course, we'll start by listening a little bit to Dr. Shiva talk about where she's at today, 6 months after we last spoke, in relationship to anything that she'd like to share. India is also suffering enormously under COVID, as well as social unrest. And then we'll come back together after Dr. Shiva and Nance and Milli share to talk about Satyagraha on Gandhi's birthday and the importance of this moment we're currently facing. So with that, Dr. Shiva, would you like to tell us about how you are this evening?
Well, I'm personally well. Thank you so much, Betta, for joining you all. Celebrating Milli's birthday today, and Lauren, your birthday tomorrow, and celebrating the Day of Nonviolence at a time where everywhere resistance against violence is growing and violence is growing. And that is what creates the precariousness. And in these 6 months since we last met, the three things that have happened in India is actually an acceleration of violence. You know, today's news is full of a very violent rape of a Dalit girl who was then killed. And I call it diversity, but in the West, it's called intersectionality. You know, in geometry, when different sections meet, that's intersectionality. But when from one system, different things grow, for me, that's multifunctionality, yeah? And when they're oppressions and they're violent oppressions, all of those multidimensional oppressions, oppression against women, oppression against, in India, Dalits, people of color all over the world, the oppression of the 1% against the 99%, and of course, the violence of the 1% against the entire earth. New data is showing in emissions data, basically that, let me just read this out to you. New analysis is showing how the rich Western nations drive the climate crisis. And it's a tiny percent of the super rich who are responsible for most of the emissions. But then it comes, and we have cyclones. In the middle of COVID, we had the cyclone Amphan. But our cyclones grow, our hurricanes grow, the fires spread. Look at the fires in California, where you are, Lauren. But look at the fires in Amazon. And 6 months ago, the COVID was just starting, and it was becoming very clear that the invasions into the forests for a highly violent, inefficient, dishonest agricultural model that's not even feeding people is the invasion that's creating pandemics, but it's also the invasion that's leading to fires in the Amazon. We don't have to grow soya in the Amazon, but it makes good money for the BlackRocks and the Vanguards. And it makes very, very good money for agribusiness. And if you think of it, when I started this work, Lauren, it was so clear. It's Cargill, which does the trade, and Monsanto, which owned the GMO seed. Well, in these 20 years, the big billionaires' asset management funds have taken over all the corporations. And so BlackRock is a big driver of the destruction. And I'm in India, where most of our, our health system's supposed to be public, our banks were supposed to be public. And my son, who's written the book, Oneness versus 1% with me, just informed me that our public sector banks, housing loans have just been taken over by Vanguard, the second biggest asset management fund. So we are, on the one hand, interrelated in a violent system, in the precariousness you mentioned, through the fires and the hurricanes, through the hunger and the unemployment, through the pandemics and the chronic diseases. But we're also interconnected through the rising that's happening, these discussions we are having, the beautiful fact that 6 months ago you sowed some seeds and now there's a harvest. And when people ask me, how in such violent and destructive times can you have hope? And I say, it lies in the seed. The seeds I have saved, which 40 years hadn't been planted, and they burst out. And they hold potential, and they hold hope. And that's why I'm so excited to see the harvest of hope. And that's also, for me, the teacher of resilience. That I think the mechanistic paradigm of the last 400-500 years has made us have three illusions. First, that unless the powerful create something, nothing is there. It's an empty earth. It's terra nullius. The human beings there aren't fully human. They're barbarians. They don't really count. They don't know how to improve the earth because they're not violent. And the idea of improvement, the measure is violence. The second total misconception is that nature is dead. And I think in the seed, we see how alive the earth is. And, I keep going back to our garden of diversity, which is in that little short film where, we are growing right now, at this point, 750 varieties of rice and lots and lots of beans and lots of vegetables. And during the lockdown, in spite of the fact that nothing was moving, There was enough vegetables
Yes.
for everyone. And my seed sisters, you call them, from around the country, would call me up and say, you know, when you said, everyone's telling us, you know, your farms are small, what will a garden grow? You must do chemicals, you must lease out your land, you must do contract farming, you must double your income. And they said, you asked us to grow gardens, Didi. And Didi is elder sister in Hindi. And we grew the gardens. And in the first 2 months of very strict lockdown, they said, we never had a day of scarcity. Our gardens gave us all the food we needed. But more than that, our gardens created the community we needed, because we would share with others who didn't have anything. And that lesson of the commons, you know, the Brooklyn program is called Common Ground. And I think all life is common ground. Life is not in isolation. Constructions of an atomized life is isolated. Ideas of individuals in society not connected to other individuals, lonely, alienated, afraid, that's a construct. The reality is like that seed that goes into the ground, and Nance will tell us much more about how it shoots out.
Yes.
Not just its roots, but its root hairs. And new research is showing that in one plant's root system, there's more neurological activity going on than in our human brain. And we've had the arrogance to think only humans have intelligence. Our work now with food and diversity and the links between food and health, and the COVID has woken up more and more people to the links between agriculture and health, food and health. And I think this is where gardens will become even more important in our times. You know,
So
that
just to,
when we
give,
nourish, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Shiva. I just wanted to give people a little bit of a chronology of your own practice in relationship to your observations about life being self-organized.
Sure.
You talked about in 1987, when the apple orchard was put in place on property that you knew had a completely self-organized environment that supported seed of all kinds. And between 87 and 95, you really were really trying to look at how genetic engineering and patents on life are the ultimate expression of the commercialization of science and the commodification of nature. And how this idea of seed and its like focus on it being an act of resistance is connected to where we are now with the idea of reclaiming the interconnectedness of all living things instead of the reductive view of these catastrophes as being isolated and site-specific.
Sure, very briefly, because I don't want to take too much time. So actually, 73 is when my forest of childhood had been replaced by apple orchard. And that's what made me join the Chipko movement, the Hug the Tree movement. 87 was a biotech meeting where the industry was saying, we will now use the tools of genetic engineering, which they didn't invent. Yeah. These were public instruments, the recombinant DNA, but now they were taking patents. And they're saying, and we will make sure that every seed of the world is patented. And we will ensure through the GATT and WTO, no farmer has their own seed. And I said, you know, listening to them, and I felt a tremor down my spine. I said, this is an empire of a life. But I also was shocked and outraged. I said, but you don't invent life. A GMO does not mean God move over. Life is self-organized complexity in constant evolution and adaptation. And it is holding all of evolutionary history in it, and is holding the potential of millennia of future evolution, which is why saving seeds is growing the future and holding that potential. And I said, second thing, you know, I'm from a country where 80% of the seeds are still in farmers' hands. And I'm going to protect those seeds, and I'm going to defend those farmers' rights. And I will not let you invade our country and our farms. Unfortunately, we managed to write laws that seeds and plants are not human inventions and therefore not patentable. But we also created community seed banks. And for me, I called it the beet satyagraha, like the salt satyagraha, the resistance to the idea that seed is an invention, seed is a machine, seed is property. These are all ideas that need resistance. And I think we need this globally now to reclaim every seed in its freedom, but not just the seed of plants. We are all seeds of humanity. And we need everyone's, if there's one place I see where the issues of stopping the violence against the earth and stopping the violence against human beings, which are the two concerns, people march for against climate change, and then others are marching for justice. Yeah, the Black Lives Matter marches, but the two come from the same violence. Yeah, why were Africans taken to the Americas to grow cotton for the empire on land that didn't belong to the British or the East India Company, to then destroy India's textiles? They cut the thumbs of the master weavers so they couldn't weave, so they could dump industrial clothing. And that's when Gandhi pulled out the spinning wheel and said, we will only be free. He realized you can't have freedom that's purely political when the empire is economic. Empire is about control over resources, control over the earth, controls over our lives. And that is where we must begin the resistance, by creating the alternative. And it's the spinning wheel that gave me the inspiration, the seed. And as Malavika mentioned in the introduction, I think one of the illusions of control is thinking of scale as bigness. That unless you have something giant and oppressive, there is no scale. But scale can be horizontal. Scale can be millions of gardens everywhere. Scale is the trillions of microbes in our gut. Scale is the amazing web that this mycorrhiza is weaving that Nance will talk to us about in the soil. Wherever there's interconnectedness, there is scale. But it's non-hierarchical, it's non-vertical, it's non-dominating. It is generous, it's giving, it's empowering, and it is spreading life and love. This vertical scale of the 1% is the scale that corrupts our democracies and has turned every leader into a laughing stock everywhere. No one has respect, Leaders were supposed to be respected. It's time for us to let the earth and the seed lead us. It's time for us to let the path of truth as Satyagraha lead the resistance, which is creative resistance in non-violent form, where we create while saying no.
Thank you so much. We'll have the choir chime in now for site-specific examples of this. Can we start with Nance? Nance has been consulting in Ecuador, another place where our seed siblings are struggling against extractive industries residue, especially with the oil extractions going on there. And Nance, would you like to tell us what your journey's been there in helping people reclaim the health and vitality of their soil, and as well what you're up to in the heartland of the Midwest?
So right now I'm sitting right on the Illinois-Wisconsin border. And you should know that rural people don't necessarily have strong, and I'm in a ecologically run farm of Carrie Jo Cook. And she's mostly a meat grower of birds and some Navajo churro sheep. And right here, I'm on the edge of some pines she has, and right on the other side of it is a sea of GMO. I don't even want to call it corn. It's basically a commodity crop. It doesn't go to feed people nor many animals. Most of it gets shipped out of the country. So this land of the Great Lakes is from in between where the eastern woodlands meet, and we're in traditionally this was prairie, so also grassland, and we've been tilling this land for a long time to supplant it with other kinds of grasses, be they oats and wheat and corn, and now it just kind of rocks between corn and soy. So we did have some woods here, most of it's destroyed, and we have open oceans of corn and soy. So one of the things I do here is I steward land, and I give it out of, want to give you that context because I've been working on corn myself. And this corn is a popcorn, with evolutionarily is very close to teosinte, which is the wild relative of corn. And I've been working on it because corn actually needs a participation of, you have to pluck each kernel out, because if this was to fall on the ground, the kernels will suffer and suffocate each other. So you have to plant each one. So it requires a human hand. It requires human participation to grow grains. And I give this to Millie and Lauren for their birthdays. I'll be sending this to Los Angeles soon. I've been a grower a long time. My family came here as settlers 200 some years ago, and they were growers. And I've been concentrating growing in urban areas as well as rural areas. And essentially 10 years ago, I realized it was actually the soil that we need to focus on, because if seed is our spinning wheel, soil might be the thread. And I see soil as the dark cosmos, as the universe under the soles of our feet, under our soulful feet as our soil. And transitioning to the work I've been doing is trying to get people to start connecting with something that we all share underneath our feet, that holds deeps our bodies at our death. And recently we had the opportunity of going to Ecuador, where soil, water, and air is all extremely contaminated. Food systems are broken. Particularly now during COVID, the food supply chain has broken, and people in the Amazon who've had so much destruction to their forest crops and their hunting lands and their fishing has been further cut off from the Andes, where they got certain crops, and also from the coastline. So there's increased need to start sharing foods between each other. And there's a really vital mobilization of people doing this right now. I haven't heard of anything like this anywhere else, because people are still really connected to Earth and understand their dependency and their interdependency with each other. And so they mobilize very quickly and very impressively, in spite of the fact that their soil and their waters and their airs are so polluted. So working with 200 farmers in a 2-province area, we've been going into basic soil science, basic soil ecology, learning about biology, chemistry, physiology of soil, not just through Western science, but empirically through our bodies, through our sensual ourselves and realizing that our bodies are our primary tools when we work with soil, and our knowing of what is good and what isn't going, what is won't support us. And they've continued, and I was supposed to go back, and they've continued, and I hear from them every week, sometimes more than once, about what they're doing, and they're highly mobilized in technologies of composting and fermented different amendments that they can make to help vitalize and recreate that sponginess in soil, and help move contaminated water through that sponginess, using microbes, using bacteria, fungi, etc., to create more healthy land to grow in. So yeah, it's pretty amazing. Because of their connection, I've never seen such a broad, united front, kind of spreading out over such a large area. Something that I think Americans can learn a lot from. I could say more, but I was wondering if somebody else wanted to speak.
Thank you so much, Nance. I think we're all mesmerized by seeing the sunshine on your body and your hair, and the blue sky and the beautiful trees behind you. Very, very lovely. And I know that Vandana also has a forest outside, although it's dead of night there. One of the beautiful things about hearing from everybody again is through this Zoom, to imagine in your mind's eye this moment that all of us seed sisters are interconnected and rejoicing in the bounty that we are helping to create in the world and within our communities. The Ecuadorian Amazon is intimately connected with the entire continent of the Americas, and has often been called the lungs of our planet. And when we go back to this idea of reductionist thinking, when we experience the great fires of the West, we often don't look at the rest of the continent to understand how the context of these fires are actually much larger than what meets the eye or what gets reported, and how that responds to the air we breathe, the commons, that one of our commons is the air, the commons of air, the commons of atmosphere. And then one of the acts of resilience that we can take is to put back from that burnt wood and that burnt fire, we can put back what we know are the building blocks of life itself. We can try and recatalyze the mycorrhizal fungi and the plant kingdoms so that they can start to pull apart the charred wood of these fires and reinfuse, especially where there's water, the life web so that it can heal itself. And so we Seed Sisters believe that there's a difference between resilience and resistance. The earth is resilient. Life web is resilient, but it's interconnected with resistance to the oppressive systems that try and take control of life. So in that sense, we at Metabolic Studio have been working with Nance to figure out if there's a way that we can glean some of the charred wood from the fires of the West and create drought-resistant water retention landscapes that have water collected from rooftops in the industrial corridor to help resist desertification and help assist the resilience of the toxified earth in rebounding. And the answer has been absolutely yes, as you can see by looking at Milli's desk. So I'm going to now turn over to talk about the Satyagraha network of small gardens and what, since 6 months ago, we've been able to catalyze and share within a large network of growers.
Hola,
Hola.
and welcome to Farmlab Seed Processing Room. We at the Metabolic Studio explore the many roles that living systems play in remediation, food systems, soil building, restoration, and community science. And as many of you can see, these incredible sacred seeds are very, very important to us growers that feel a true connection to the land. The power of these seeds bring us humans closer to the natural world, albeit our disconnection, even though we are 2 to 3 generations removed from the growing or being on the land. I've witnessed the power of these seeds, how it brings us closer to understanding and being more compassionate towards our Mother Earth, even though I'm in an urban environment. If I stop to think for 1 second as to where I'm currently sitting, I'm only a few feet away from the Los Angeles River, sitting in an industrial corridor on what was once a brownfield, toxic land, and now a super beautiful greenfield due to our regenerative practices. And just imagine what was once a tow yard is now an amazing habitat for coyotes, insects, mushrooms, microorganisms, bunny rabbits, birds, skunks, squirrels, pollinators, and so much more. And it all began from simply removing the concrete and tarmac and allowing the earth to breathe and self-regenerate with seed. Back in May, Dr. Shiva encouraged us all to get planting as an act of resistance. The Metabolic Studio immediately created a small network of Satyagraha gardens across the country. We've grown fava beans, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash, sunflowers, kale, lettuces, cabbages, gourds, guavas, avocados, citruses, and so much more. I'm still in disbelief that we were able to grow over 3,400 pounds of fresh organic food. Let me repeat that. 3,400 pounds of organic food in less than 6 months. And on top of that, we shared this fresh food with those that are currently in need due to our current pandemic and loss of jobs. So at this moment, I'd like to actually recognize those amazing growers from Owens Valley, from Vermont, from Los Angeles, from Guatemala, our beautiful tribe, seed sisters, Quachalum, Seed Savers in Arizona, and so many more of you. I'd also like to recognize that many of those people that are within our Satyagraha gardens, it's their actually first time growing. Talk about a micro action becoming a global action. That's Dr. Shiva's quote. It all began with seed. So if you've ever wondered how to heal the planet, how to heal yourself, and how to heal others, start by simply planting one seed today. Start a garden of love and diversity. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Milli. And now we were going to turn to a little bit of a conversation amongst us about Satyagraha and this particular moment of precarity. Dr. Shiva, would you like to tell us a little bit about your visions of where we can go from here? What our collective commitment to one another is, despite all odds, to persevere in this moment, in doing what we know is the right thing to do for Mother Earth, for life?
So I noticed the many comments, and some people wanted to know, they didn't know what, how you spell it or what it is. But Satyagraha, Satya is truth. Agraha is the force. So the force of truth. That's why it's non-violent, because that seed that Milli is showing us. And then she's saying most of the people were first-time growers, which allows you to have the humility to know that you are not the masters of the process. You're just facilitators. The seed is doing the work. You are co-creators with her, and she's the leading person. So the truth of the seed then is the truth of life. And I think at this particular moment of deep uncertainty, deep tragedy for so many millions, many more people are already dying of hunger, of chronic diseases, than the virus that has got primacy of news time. And people, even in America, which already had tragic food deserts, the richest country in the world has food deserts. And now the queues at the food banks grow longer and longer and longer. So the idea of Satyagraha as resistance that's non-violent in creative form, but a resistance of truth, for me means A, getting out of our reductionist mind, which for those who dominate means more power, but for those who are dominated, if we are reductionists, it means more powerlessness, because we fail to see our own interconnectedness. And we fail to see the interconnectedness of the multiple crises. And so we get into our silos of fighting climate change, dealing with the health crisis and the pandemic, dealing with homelessness, dealing with food deserts, dealing with loneliness, dealing with alienation. All of this is coming from the alienation. And, it's interesting, I've just done a forward to an English translation of a book of the 19th century, written by Liebig, who, I might not be pronouncing him right, called the founder of modern chemistry, who's the one who really brought metabolic rifts and metabolic balance into contemporary discourse. And he talked about how synthetic fertilizers had separated the country and the city. And he talks about a metabolic rift between our sense. And this book, he talks about tearing down the altars of falsehood that chemical fertilizers feed us. So this moment of Satyagraha is discovering the truth of life, discovering the truth of our power, discovering the truth of solidarity. And, every time I see those amazing marches for justice, and I said this to Greta when, she met me in Paris, and I've said it to all the Fridays of the Future, Dynamic Youth. I say, strike every day. Strike on Fridays, but do a garden in your schools. And these gardens of hope are gardens of resistance. These gardens of hope are basically taking from the seed, taking from the soil, taking from our relatives who are not human, and taking from all of our human relatives too, the power to act in oneness, to the power that comes from love. My life's lessons have taught me that resistance from love, which is resistance from truth, is not conquerable because it comes from there. Whereas resistance from fear and resistance from hate can be squashed like a fly in a teacup. And we cannot be squashed. This moment of history is too important for the future. And so we must be seeds of resistance. We must sow and spread gardens of diversity, gardens of hope. And as our national anthem says, and through the diversity we grow, weave garlands of love. And these garlands of love are ecological harmony for the earth. Because to me, ecological action, bringing the metabolic activity, what is metabolism? But the ability to maintain life, to regulate life. If we didn't have a metabolic order in our body, we are not healthy. The earth is a beautiful living organism who has her own metabolism. And just like diabetes is a metabolic disorder of the human body, for me, climate change is a metabolic disorder of the living planet. And we have to bring the trust in balance back. And that trust means you have to get out of this mode that man is the master, the conqueror, the engineer. But we are one strand in an amazing, complex, beautiful, self-regulating web of life that renews life systems, repairs broken systems. Yeah, we get a little cut, it repairs. The earth has cuts again and again and again, and she repairs and she heals. So I think a big part of resistance right now is resistance to hopelessness and fear, and throwing our love and trust with the seed and the soil and the earth and saying, we will take power from you and we will give you love. Because we don't have the power that you have, but we have lots of love to give you, lots of gratitude. And that tireless garden is what will create the future. Because if we don't do this resistance, if we don't do this Satyagraha for a future, keep that one last seed in our hands. Yeah? Because as long as we have love in our hearts and a seed that is free and fertile in our hands, the future is fertile.
Would you like to go to Q&A?
I want to hear
Sure.
those beautiful birds out there, and wanted to allow them to speak for themselves also, and remind everybody that one way to connect with the seed is to follow your intuitive self and to allow the sensorium of the life web to lead you forward. Now we can go to Q&A.
I actually have to cut in, and we're going to do things a little inverted today. At the beginning, I had the honor of introducing one of my favorite artists and a dear friend at the Rail, Lauren Bond, who we've heard speak already, but there was a slight lag in the connectivity. So I would love to introduce Lauren Bond now before you. So Lauren is an environmental artist from Los Angeles. Her practice, of which we've heard so much, Metabolic Studio, explores self-sustaining and self-diversifying systems of exchange that feed emergent properties to regenerate the life web. Some among many of her works include Not a Cornfield, which very magnificently transformed and revived an industrial brownfield downtown LA into a 32-acre cornfield for one agricultural cycle. She's also known for 100 Mules Walking the Los Angeles Aqueduct, 240-mile performative action to reconnect the city of LA with the source of its water. And her studio's current work, which we really touched on a little, and I hope we will hear more about in the Q&A, Bending the River Back into the City, aims to utilize LA's first private water right to deliver 106 acre feet of water annually from the LA River to over 50 acres of land in the historic core of downtown LA. Lauren writes that this model can be replicated to regenerate the 52-mile LA River and reconnect it to its flood plain to form a citizen's utility. Very appropriate to the topic of the commons. I thought, it would be a shame to move forward without speaking of and contextualizing some of these accomplishments, which are wonderful seed for thought. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, so without further ado, our first question will come from Sarah Philly in the audience. And Sarah, you give me a moment to locate you. You should be able to turn on your microphone now.
Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here at this conversation. It's really moving and inspiring. My question is that I'm starting a regenerative demonstration food forest in West Michigan and wanted to know how to more formally connect with this rhizome of healing gardens and if there was even a seed exchange or, hi, Rachel. Hi, everyone. So yeah, just looking for more formal ways to participate and connect with other people.
Absolutely, Sarah. You know, we're always willing to share our seed, and thanks for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to see you virtually, even though we've seen each other in person on Thursday nights. Yeah, absolutely. I actually encourage everyone to contact Metabolic Studio. We're always willing to share the seed, and we'd love to incorporate you in the Satyagraha network of gardens. And we can definitely communicate on how we can exchange and help others during this challenging time.
I will also say that one of the things that we're looking at is trying to help network growers in biozones, bioregions, which are nearby. And we will be happy to try and network you into the growing network of gardeners that we're currently working with in Ann Arbor, in Detroit, in Rochester, in Toronto, in Milwaukee, in Chicago. Because there's a whole, as you well know, there's a whole large movement of people that are recognizing that the Great Lakes is a very good choice for a place to be living at this current moment in time. And also remediative agriculturalists who are looking at recalibrating where the toxic waste of industrial farms are going, which is usually it's transported out of the Great Lakes area into the adjacent watershed of Mississippi, and from there down to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're also working with a network of scientists and universities that are interested in regenerating the toxic waste of agriculture. And we will be sure to get you involved with that.
I'd be happy to help too, as a Midwesterner.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could just jump in. I was really intrigued. Thank you all for those responses. Sarah, you also asked in the chat, could Milli tell us what is on the table in terms of seeds? And Milli, I've been so curious now for the past hour. I was wondering if you could take a second and you could explain your cornucopia to us.
Absolutely. So in front of me is I have corn seed that is the original corn that Lauren had planted in 2015 as her part of her art project, Not a Cornfield. And this seed has been saved and grown out and distributed throughout the world for others to grow. Now, all of the seed that you see in front of me is heirloom, organically grown food. We have beautiful Hopi corn. We have these amazing giant, I'm so excited. Can you tell them I love seed? Giant sunflower seeds. I'm gonna stand back so you guys can see the size of the seed, the flower. It's bigger than my head. It's so amazing. We also have our beautiful fava beans. We are currently saving squash or zucchini, and this can be the size of like a small child. We have a couple of gourds that we're currently drying for seed. So all of these varieties are the ones that we grew here along the industrial corridor. Others grew different types of crops, but this is simply a small fraction of what we've saved this year. So if you can imagine, if you have a small plot if you have a small plot and you grow a couple of sunflowers, you probably will go home with such an abundance like this. It's pretty amazing. Thanks for asking.
Just to give you a size idea, all of this is grown in about 1/8 of an acre. So in a parking lot. So this bounty is also been tested for its toxicology, and we can eat all of this, which is again an amazing thing. Because last year we couldn't eat the corn. This year we can. So corn does work to pull toxic material out of the ground, especially in our empirical sites around the LA River. And we grew the sunflower seeds to see if we could grow some protein as well. So that was our goal.
So incredible. I, for one, I had no idea that corn could be used as a remediation. So that's something to keep in mind.
Malavika, I went to Fukushima the year after the disaster. I was invited by the organic farmers there. And organic farming didn't just get rid of toxics, it got rid of nuclear radiation. That is how amazing life is. Yeah, life in its complexity is not just regenerative, it is healing and it's cleaning. It cleans up the mess.
I love that. Our next question will come from Sam Harris as well. Sam, you should be able to turn on your microphone with your question.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody. This is so amazing. Thank you so much. I'm learning so much. I was just hoping that one of you or more than one could speak about land trust and land collectives, because many of us have so little access to land, no real legal to access land to plant the seeds. So what other ways can we develop scaling up of the access to the land as commons to help grow this? Thank you.
So I don't think that's particularly any of our expertise, but rather what we've been really focusing on is getting networks of growers to grow within the land they do have access to, and recognizing that every little bit counts. But there are definitely existing land trusts in different regions. Nance, do you know about the Midwest? Do you have anything that you can throw in on that?
Yeah. Not so much happening on the Midwest. I see it happening in the Northeast right now through people connected through Soulfire Farm, Leah Penman's operation. Hyperion Saka Iver is doing some work in that direction and creating better land trusts and doing different kinds of ways of doing community holding. And so I would contact him because he's also connected in the Southeast. So I know things are happening in the Northeast and the Southeast, and some work is happening out West, but I'm not so connected to it. Those would be my leads.
Malavika?
Yes?
Yeah, so, I think it's extremely important to remember that most farmers of the world are in the South. They're all small farmers and they provide 70 to 80% of the food we eat. Yeah, it's like you said, Nance, those cornfields next to you, the GMO corn, is not a food system. It's a greed system. It's a toxic greed system that's wiping out the monarch butterflies, wiping out the biodiversity of plants and beneficial insects, and is basically a desert. And the tragedy is You know, this is part of my work right now. I'm doing a new report on Bill Gates, about whom I wrote my book, Oneness versus 1%. But he's promoting fake lab food based on reconstituting GMO soya in the lab. Because then not only are there patents on seed, then there are patents on fake food, which will desertify our gut like the GMO soya has desertified the land. And I think this whole issue of life in abundance, biodiversity in abundance, outside, in the forests, on the farms, in our gut, in our minds. You know, to me, art is about the biodiversity of the mind. It's so important. And to the extent that we create this awareness about a living earth linked through gardens, we then have to start working on our gardens ourselves, but thinking of what's the food system for the future. We need a global movement to stop the invasion of the Amazon for GM soya. You know, we absolutely need to stop that invasion. The second, so we've got to protect every small farmer there is as part of this movement for justice. Yeah. The past farmers were brought as slaves to North America, and they are marching on the streets in Black Lives Matter. But today, farmers are being driven out, and all UN predictions are saying they will be refugees and slaves. We can't afford the return of slavery by creating new destitution. But for the particular question that was asked by Anne, just before the Paris summit on climate, I was invited by the organic farmers of Paris who didn't have land. But they said, if we who want to farm and supply good organic food to the greater Paris region, and those in Paris who want to be able to get good food, those in the city who have the money buy the collective farms. The movement is called AMPA. It's more than community supported agriculture of individual farmers. It's a whole network. And just a little reminder, it's only with the East India Company, the word invest became reduced to money. Before that, it meant to make something beautiful. You invest in the land, you make the land beautiful. You invest in your children, you make them beautiful. And I think we've got to bring back, like the diversity of our seed, we've got to bring back the imagination of the diversity of investments. And when we have a new synergy and a new convergence between different forms of investment, then this problem of land scarcity will be solved. Because the problem of land scarcity is linked to the problem of food scarcity, because America's land does not provide food. It's providing commodities. And I think a lot of it should be allowed to go back to the prairies. And we should intensify the gardens and the farm. Our work in Navdanya, and for those who want to visit, we are offering courses all the time. Monday, I'm going to start a course on return to the earth. How do we return to the earth as our being, as our identity, as our economy of care, as an economy of growing? And then a series all the time. If you go to the Navdanya website, Navdanya, you can also visit the website of Friends of Navdanya. I hope my dear friend Mary is in this conversation today. Those of you who want to find out more, to connect with her. But I think each of the problems that looks absolutely insurmountable is because of reductionisms. Reduction of investment to money. Reduction of land to ownership. You know, I think the crisis we are living through is so deep that it requires a Satyagraha that is so creative that everything that can be changed, we should change.
I'm pausing in case anyone else wants to jump in, but I think you've put it so beautifully. Millie, Nance, Lauren. Well, then I will say, Dr. Shiva, what you were saying really resonates with so much of my thinking as well. I think it's so important to remember that these thoughts of scarcity and resource extraction on the land are a specific colonial legacy, right? They're not just inherent things that exist in the water and air. So I feel like that's a valuable thing to come back to again and again, that these are specific inventions, specific perversion, specific things that have come into the mind, and that they can be removed as well.
And Malavika, it's more serious than that, because it is enforced through law. Why did I start to save seeds? Because the idea of seed scarcity, seed is abundance. One seed, if you look at Milli's table, gives you so many seeds. The family of crops called millets are called millets because each gives rise to 1 million seed, million according to the Italians, which is actually 100,000, but a tiny millet seed gives you 100,000 seed. How can you have scarcity? And the very nature of seed is to make seed, to make seed, to make seed. Bija, that which arises from itself again and again. So the idea of GMO and hybrids creates scarcity in seed, so the seed does not renew. Patenting is to make it illegal to save seeds, so the seed doesn't renew. And in everything, whether even food, everywhere there are these food safety modernization acts that are making artisanal food illegal. Good cheeses, good cakes for the hospital are illegal, In India, I had to do a Satyagraha to protect not just our edible oils, which were made illegal, to dump GMO soya on us, but Gandhi's Kahani was made illegal 2 years ago. And I had to do a Satyagraha to protect Gandhi's Kahani in order to dump industrial bad oils, palm oil, GMO soya oil. And scarcity is the only way the 1% economy works. Nature's economy works through abundance. Living economies of gardens and communities work through a shared abundance. There is no scarcity where we care and we share. There's scarcity when we grab, we take, we extract, and never give back.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize the sharing. And when you're growing, there's so much abundance, you can't manage it all anyway. So you might as well call up those neighbors and share so broadly. I'm overwhelmed every day with how much abundance is being produced and with such little effort, with such little participation.
I'm going to jump in. Our next question will come from the lovely Anya. Anya, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you all so much for your wisdom today. Just the conversation we're having really reminds me of the work of Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation, and she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and she's a trained botanist, and I think her work is really exciting because she approaches the science of plants, through her own indigenous epistemology, which says that other living beings besides humans, give us knowledge and we can learn from one another. And then I was also thinking about Winona LaDuke's All Our Relations, where she directly links environmental racism to settler colonialism and violence on Native peoples, specifically Native women. And I think so much of what those people and so many others like them are doing resonates with all of what I've heard from you today. And I just wanted to ask, especially those of you who are working in the United States on stolen land, how do you reconcile that tension between doing this work on that land as settlers, and how might those of us interested in having our own farms and gardens who are not indigenous to this land incorporate these epistemologies or begin to engage with them? And I want to know if that's something that comes up in your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Anya. That is an absolutely central aspect of what one of the principles of Metabolic Studio's Farmlab is to first of all understand the that we're coming from a position of asking what we can do to heal the pain body of the land that we've found ourselves on. And part of that is that it's a completely colonized landscape. It's a landscape that was colonized by our need to control floodwaters, by the Army Corps way of thinking about managing water supply. But they were managing that for settler colonial structures that were put on the floodplain of a pre-colonial food shed of the Tongva Gabrielino people. So the work that we're doing at Metabolic Studio is definitely involved with a reconciliation of the current state of a managed floodplain and a place that had a millennial-long custodianship by Native people. Similarly, we are tasking ourselves to educate ourselves and do as much reading as we possibly can by Native people writing about Native practices. And in fact, tonight, we invite you to join our Fires of the West Learning and Native Plant Embroidery Circle, where we will actually be talking about Indigenous fire practices and the relationship between what we're going through in the West and the epistemicide, how we have not only colonized land, but destroyed the practices, millennial-long practices of the Indigenous people on how to manage our forests. So this is an absolutely central aspect of our practice and our mission, is to make sure that we never think about ownership of anything, including the idea of having a water right, which is, consciously unconscionable, but it's a tool to navigate a healing of the floodplain. So we move down that route to make progress. But it's central to us to find voices of Indigenous history that are written by Indigenous people for us, so that we can do what we can. We believe the only way forward is through assimilating Native strategies for the interdependence of all living systems. Millie, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. And we also practice inviting a lot of the Indigenous people that come through Los Angeles in order to connect them with other growers, whether they're within the same tribe or not. In the past, we've connected Quachalum, they're Indigenous people from Guatemala, with Dr. Shiva at the Heirloom Seed Conference. We've connected Quachalum also with Native peoples in Owens Valley, who are the Paiute Shoshone. And when the Paiute Shoshone come here and ask for help, whether it's to advocate for their water right or advocate for their land, Metabolic stands strong with them at City Hall or at DWP. A lot of the seed that you see in front of me is also exchanged with a lot of Tongva people, Paiute people, and Quachalum people, or all types of Indigenous people from Arizona. So the reciprocity of exchange of seed, exchange of food, exchange of knowledge within the Metabolic Studio practice is really strong. And that's something that Lauren didn't mention. She began these practices on the native Tongva land, acknowledging every event that we open up. We always acknowledge the native peoples of this land. We used to have ceremony on the other side of the river on 32 acres of land where Lauren grew 32 acres of corn and invited the native peoples for them to have their ceremony, because we understood that this was their land, or this is actually their land. So as Lauren mentioned, the seed doesn't belong to us. The seed belongs to everyone.
And I also would like to call on and acknowledge the Paiute, whose water we've been using in the Los Angeles metropolitan area for 110 years nearly. and that we are actively involved with the Owens Valley, so-called Owens Valley, what used to be called Payahunadu, and Paiute, the land where there will always be water. We are seed sharing with the tribes there of the bounty we grow in downtown Los Angeles, and are actively in conversation with the Paiute about how to steward the watersheds in these arid lands. So it's a big part of our learning. Nance, do you have anything you'd like to add from the Midwest perspective or any other?
I think what's interesting about coming from a long line of settlers who have taken land and owned land for a long time is trying to find out who to leave it to, since there's so many people who are not so connected to land. And so what I've been doing is talking to people about what does it look like to transition into giving it, repatriating it, giving it up, or slowly stewarding or mentoring people as they come to get to know the land that I work on for the end of my life, you know. So it's really interesting question, because repatriation is, and those questions are very much in the forefront of my mind as a 54-year-old. And so I'm thinking about, how do I transition, since I don't have any heirs, since I'm most of the growers I know in urban places are very young and new doing it, and it's gonna take some years to see if they want to take that on. So I'm actively looking for opening up my land to be more porous for other things happening. And right now there's a group of young women from Chicago who are building a sukkah because of, for Sukkot, which is a harvest festival for the Jewish tradition. And so they're on my land for the next 5 days, and all I do is support them and stay out of their way to do that. So I open up my land to a lot of different people, but I'm actively how do I transition this in a way that's so it feels right, and I'm looking for that right now. So that's a personal struggle of mine.
Thank you so much, Nance. Our last question, I'm going to be a little greedy and claim it as my own, but it's a consolidation of a couple different things that I saw growing in the chat. Lauren, you spoke earlier about the difference between resilience and resistance, both in terms of ecology, but clearly these terms also exist in our political lives and apply to our social and communal lives. So I had a question, and this is me genuinely seeking advice, as well as asking generally. How do we cultivate resilience in the self? What are, and if, any of you have thoughts on this in the context of the last 6 months, in the context of feeding gardens, daily practices, what allows you to cultivate resilience in these moments?
Well, I can start. For me, this moment of precarity that I mentioned is about finding a practice that is about doing whatever I can to support life, from which so much has been extracted, extorted, taken over the last period of human colonial and extractive economies. And that's independent from the work that I'm committing myself to, which is a resistance movement from the political, and they overlap. But the resilience practice is in regenerating a feedback loop for the life web, so it will be repaired no matter what happens with our narrative. Whatever the next story is, as human beings, I feel the resilience of the life web is a practice that you can take on in small and large ways. So for me, an example would be when an oak tree falls in the woods, if it falls in a place where you can assist it in becoming nourishment for a field of baby oaks to emerge, if that assistance is by helping break it down quicker and spreading it over an area that's very, very desiccated and troubled, and you can observe within 6 to 8 months, hundreds of new trees coming out of the ground. This is both an act of resistance and resilience. It's a resistance because it re-qualifies my notion of my labor and my time. So I use my labor in a way that can't be accounted for in traditional thinking economically. And I do it for the purpose of regenerating, facilitating a regeneration of the life web. So I think that in this time of maximum precariousness, even if you don't have access to a large amount of space, you can think about everything you're doing as an act of facilitating the resilience of the life web. Composting is an example of resilience. Separating your garbage out is an act of resilience. Supporting your local growers network by getting your food not from markets, but from growers is an act of resilience and resistance. Teaching yourself, reading, moving from sentiment into knowledge is an act of resilience and resistance. But also being teachable. Almost everything that I've learned this year about how to grow has come from the network of growers that know more than me. So it's tackling the idea of being an expert at anything and tapping into being a part of a movement to give back to life at this moment. Dr. Shiva, would you like, being the core of all of our inspirations, would you like to talk about resilience and resistance?
Just very quickly, because I realize I'm sure it's time to start wrapping up. But for me, resilience is the capacity to adapt. Yeah. So things change, circumstances change, and that constant evolution in life, yeah, is the resilience of life. And it comes because of interconnectedness. It comes because of self-organization. It comes from the ability to be able to constantly co-evolve in changing circumstances and never ever getting exhausted. The seed never gets exhausted. When we pray in India, when we sow seed, we say, let the seed be exhaustless. And you talked about resistance, but, to me, I take a walk in I'm in my childhood home, and I take a walk, and the plants are bursting through the concrete. Yeah. To me, that is the resistance of life, And when I started my work on the Green Revolution, and I wrote about it in my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, those seeds, the native seeds, resisted the chemicals. That's why they lodged. That's why Borlaug had to do dwarfing for the chemicals. And he got a Nobel Prize for mutilating the plants. And I think, we have so many people, we need to go beyond anthropocentrism and think of all our relatives. But I think it's a bit arrogant to say anthropocentrism stops with animals. Yeah. The plants and the violence to GMOs and GMO corn and GMO soya, that's acceptable. The violence to my gut that makes me sick, that's acceptable. violence to microbes, that's acceptable. No, all of life in its complex web, all of it is sentient. All of it has to be treated with love and nonviolence. And that, I think, is the basis of both resistance and resilience. And it's a good day to remember all this on the Day of Nonviolence.
Thank you so much. Dr. Shiva, you're a joy to listen to. This is just so lovely. Thank you. I feel like we could all sit here all day. Unfortunately, time waits for no one. So at the Rail, we have this tradition of ending lunch with a poem, and we've been lucky enough to carry that into these community events. So today, I'm thrilled to welcome the poet Zohra Saeed to the stage. Zohra is a Brooklyn-based Afghan-American poet. Her poetry and essays have been published in numerous anthologies and journals. I know this because I typed the bio. She's very published. Some selections include This Day, Diaries of an American Woman, Chosen Voices of Resistance, Muslim Women on War, Faith and Sexuality, among many others. She co-founded Upset Press with the poet Robert Bourras and teaches literature at Bard High School Early College in Queens, New York. Zohra, you should be able to unmute yourself. Hi.
Hi.
And I would love if you would introduce by telling us about the image from the Shahnameh you have behind you.
This is the tragedy of Sohrab and Rustam, which connects actually really well with the talk because it's a father that kills his son by accident because of his ego. And here it's sort of a symbol of the older, something more powerful. Rustam was part of the courts, sort of destroying the youthful energy and ambition and joy of a younger generation. So although I did not pick it for that, I just picked it for the pink, just to let you all know. All this talk of trees reminded me of my father talking about walnuts and pine trees in Afghanistan. So I'm going to just share a poem about that. It's called Walnuts in Nangarhar. Nangarhar is site of war, but is also the site of incredible trees. Walnuts in Nangarhar. That time I failed at rescuing a sparrow in Mulberry Bend Park. Dusty and desperate, the bird slipped from my hands despite the bare toothpicks of its wings. That time I soaked walnuts for half mewa, not knowing they were rancid. I used sinjid from a bag of Chinese herbs and spiked Nauruz with a fertility spell. That time I returned to check on the sparrow and found the tree cut. That time in Algom, when father, a child then, pricked fresh walnuts with the mountain girls. They showed him the thin green skin between shell and walnut, then rubbed it on his lips and cheeks, giggling. In a hand mirror, he saw himself stained pink. The girls circled around him, clapped in unison, and teased him, a delicious trick that kept its color a full week. That time, so long ago, in the season of walnuts.
Amen.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the beautiful poem. I believe we may go to our very own publisher, Fang Bui.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. Thank you, Milli.
Hello.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much, Nance. It reminds me so much what you just say of resilient, resistant, and so on, and also the ability to adapt. You know, the Dutch-born American artist named Willem de Kooning once said something very funny. He said, for milk to become yogurt, it needs culture. So I think culture and agriculture are so interrelated in the form of nurturing and healing. And this is exactly what we're going through. And what you mentioned earlier about wisdom, it reminded me now what Eleanor Roosevelt once said, never mistake knowledge for wisdom, because one is helping you to make a living, the other one is helping you to make a life. And I think that's where we are. We are making a life together. So for that, I'm grateful to you, Lauren, to you, Dr. Shiva, Nance, Milli, let's work together. We'll shall overcome. It helped on in the Great Depression, and it did in the Renaissance, and we can do it again now. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fang. And thank you to all our lovely speakers and growers today. Thank you, Milli. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Nance. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. I want to say an extra special thank you to Lauren, who is the nexus of this network, this life web of people who've gathered together to join us for this vital conversation. I also want to hype an event happening this very evening, so you're in luck. Please join Metabolic Studios tonight at 5:30 Pacific and 8:30 Eastern for their first evening of a 12-week series of Zoom gatherings titled Fires of the West, where we will be educating ourselves on native land management, sovereignty, the history of fire, and decolonizing our understanding of fire and burning to create a more resilient ecosystem. My understanding is that these are funky gatherings for learning, gathering, and crafting together. We'll be dropping the link in the chat. Please also join us here again on Monday for the New Social Environment, where we will have producer, director, writer, and activist Catherine Gund in conversation with our editor-at-large, Thursday Nicholas Goodeve, and we'll close with a poetry reading from Mahogany Brown, and that will be, as always, at 1 p.m. Eastern, right here in the Zoom. Aside from that, thank you all for tuning in. You can activate your microphones and shout out your thank yous and goodbye if you'd like. Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend and a blessed series of birthdays, Milli, to Lauren, and to everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much,
Happy
Mohika.
birthday,
Millie.
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lauren.
Birthday,
Happy
Milli.
birthday,
Happy
Milli.
birthday, Lauren.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Libras.
Thank you, Dr.
Much
Shiva.
love.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to hear your voice.
Thank you, Lauren.
Hi, Junebug.
Thank you, Vedanta Shiva. Thank you,
Dr. Shiva.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dr.
everyone.
Shiva.
Yeah.
Thank
Hi,
you.
guys.